Over the Bay of Biscay, on the 3rd of April, 1940, the sky turned into a trap. 6. Junkers 88 fighters were diving toward a single British flying boat, their cannons screaming. The Sunderland pilots knew what was coming. They were outnumbered 6-1 in a slow, defenseless-looking aircraft. Nobody expected them to survive. And yet, when the smoke cleared and the U-88s broke off their attack, 3 German fighters were falling from the sky. This was the moment the Luftwaffe learned something. They would never forget this flying boat, this slow patrol aircraft designed for maritime reconnaissance, had teeth, and they were sharp. The Sunderland would earn itself a name that day, a name that would spread through German fighter squadrons like a warning. The Fliegendes Stachelschwein, the flying Porcupine, not because it was dangerous in the way a fighter was dangerous, but because it bristled with so many guns in so many directions that no pilot wanted to be the one foolish enough to attack it alone. But this story doesn't begin with combat. It begins with compromise. In 1933, the Air Ministry in London issued a specification. They needed a new flying boat. The existing ones were ancient, flimsy biplanes. The world was changing. Aircraft were faster, stronger. The Empire's trade routes stretched across oceans that no other nation's ships could effectively patrol. Britain needed a flying boat that could fly long distances, loiter over the water for hours, and actually defend itself. It seemed like an impossible ask. Flying boats were slow, they were heavy, and adding guns meant adding weight, which meant losing range. Something had to give. Enter Short Brothers. They were already working on something remarkable, the Empire flying boat, a civilian aircraft built for Imperial Airways. It was elegant, fast for its time, and spacious. On the 14th of October, 1937, the first prototype of the military version took to the air. They called it the S-25, the Sunderland. It was a 4-engine aircraft with a hull so deep you could stand up inside it. The fuselage was so large that crews had space to sleep, a small galley for hot food, even lavatories. This wasn't a fighter cockpit. This was a flying patrol boat, designed for crews to live aboard during 13-hour missions over open ocean. By June of 1938, the RAF had its first squadron, 40 Sunderlands, at full strength. They began patrols immediately. The Battle of the Atlantic was still a year away, but the tension was unmistakable. U-boats were already hunting British shipping. The Sunderland's job was to find them first. The aircraft's speed was around 213 miles per hour at altitude. Not fast, not slow for the era, but compared to the fighters that would be hunting it, the Sunderland was a lumbering giant. A Bf-109 could hit 400 mph. A Ju-88 could do similar speeds. By all logic, the Sunderland shouldn't have stood a chance. It was large, it was slow, it was visible from miles away. Every rule of air combat said the Sunderland should die the moment it encountered enemy fighters. Yet, something extraordinary happened. The Sunderland's designers had anticipated this. They'd looked at the specifications and asked a simple question. If we can't make it fast, what if we make it impossible to attack? They took every gun they could mount and pewed it somewhere. The nose got a turret too, machine guns. The dorsal turret featured 2 guns pointing up and out. The tail turret had 4 guns. But they didn't stop there. Hatches along the fuselage could be fitted with manually operated Vickers guns. Some crews added additional weapons by drilling through the hull. By some accounts, fully equipped Sunderlands carried as many as 14 machine guns, each one firing thousands of rounds per minute. From a distance, the aircraft bristled with gun barrels the way a porcupine bristles with quills. It was this image that would inspire the German nickname, not because the Sunderland was particularly deadly by itself, but because attacking one was like poking a porcupine. You were going to get hurt. 1940 was the year the Sunderland's real test came. The Luftwaffe had invaded France, conquered the Low Countries, and suddenly the German Air Force had bases far closer to British territory. The Battle of the Atlantic was entering its most brutal phase. Boats were sinking hundreds of thousands of tons of shipping, starving Britain of supplies. The Sunderland squadrons were flying anti-submarine patrols, trying to locate and attack the underwater predators. Bateau ghetto the Atlantic, Sunderlands had to fly over waters that the Luftwaffe now controlled. On the 2nd of June, 1943, a day that would become legendary in Sunderland lore, a Mark III Sunderland, piloted by Flight Lieutenant John Beecham, was returning from an anti-shipping patrol over the Bay of Biscay. The sun was beginning to set. Beecham was low on fuel, and that's when 8 Junkers 88s found him. 8 fighters against 1 flying boat. The arithmetic seemed simple. The Sunderland had no chance. The pilot's only option was to fly as low as possible to skim the wave tops and make it harder for the fighters to coordinate. The dorsal gunners began firing upward at the diving Ju-88s. The tail gunner was already turning in his turret, tracking the diving fighters trying to come in from behind. Beecham threw the big aircraft into evasive maneuvers that no one thought a flying boat of that size could pull off. The engagement lasted 45 minutes. 45 minutes of constant combat at altitudes so low that the Sunderland's wingtips were practically touching the water. The Germans kept attacking. The Sunderland kept fighting back. By the time the Ju-88s finally broke off, low on ammunition, damaged, their pilots bruised and shaken, the Sunderland had shot down 3 of them. 3 confirmed kills. The aircraft itself was riddled with bullet holes, had lost an engine, and had wounded crew members. Butet limped back to base, land intact. Everyone aboard survived. That single engagement became the most famous in the Sunderland's history. It proved something that strategists had theorized but never seen in practice. Overwhelming firepower could compensate for speed. Yes, the Sunderland was slow. Yes, it was vulnerable. Butet, a pilot, was brave enough to fight instead of run. If the gunners could stay calm under fire, if the aircraft could absorb punishment and keep flying, then the fire the date's time, mathematics changed. 8 fighters could lose a battle to 1 flying boat. The story of that single Sunderland spread through the Luftwaffe like wildfire. German pilots began calling it the Flying Porcupine, and they began being more cautious. The aircraft's reputation grew faster than its actual capability. Some pilots refused to attack Sunderlands without overwhelming numerical advantage. Others called them unsinkable. There were exaggerations. Certainly, the Sunderland was not invincible, but the psychological impact was real. An aircraft that should have been easy prey had become something to respect. The Sunderland's true significance, though, wasn't individual air battles. It was in the broader picture of the Battle of the Atlantic. By 1943, long-range patrol aircraft had become essential to anti-submarine warfare. A U-boat on the surface was vulnerable. But the Atlantic is vast. Finding a single U-boat in millions of square miles of pry. Ocean requires patience, range, and luck. The Sunderland, with its 13-hour endurance, could search vast areas. It could loiter over a convoy, watching for periscopes. It could carry depth charges and actually attack submarines, not just report their location. And because of its armament, it could defend itself against the Luftwaffe fighters that the find of the fighters Germans were desperately trying to send against the patrol squadrons. By 1944, when the Second Front was opening in Normandy, the Sunderland was still flying anti-submarine patrols. It had proven itself not in the dogfights that made fighter pilots famous. Button the grinding, unglamorous work of keeping shipping lanes clear. Hundreds of U-boats were sunk during the Battle of the Atlantic. The Sunderland, and aircraft like it, played a crucial role in those kills. But what made the Sunderland special wasn't just its hunting ability, it was its willingness to fight. The Sunderland also served in the Far East, where Japanese aircraft proved to be a different sort of threat. Japanese fighters like the Zero were faster and more agile than anything in the Atlantic. The Sunderland still found itself at a disadvantage. Yet, even there, the big flying boat proved capable of defending itself. There are documented engagements where Sunderlands damaged or destroyed Japanese fighters, even though the fighters were superior in almost every performance metric. What then was the secret of the Sunderland? It wasn't innovation in aircraft design. Other nations built flying boats. The Sunderland wasn't the fastest, the largest, or the most advanced. Booty was robust, it was well armed, and its designers had made a program. Fundamental choice. If we can't be fast, we'll be stubborn. We'll survive punishment that should destroy us. We'll keep flying even when we should be falling from the sky. We'll keep shooting even when we're outnumbered. And if the enemy underestimates us because we're slow and big, then we'll use that against them. The crews that flew Sunderlands were remarkable people. They endured 13-hour patrols in a slow, vulnerable aircraft over hostile waters. They kept their discipline in the face of fighter attacks. When they had the chance, as Flight Lieutenant Beecham did on that June day in 1943, they fought with a ferocity that German pilots didn't expect. They turned what should have been a one-sided massacre into a victory. And in doing so, they carved a legend that persisted through the rest of the war and into history. By 1945, the Sunderland had flown thousands of patrols. It had attacked countless U-boats. It had fought off fighter attacks and survived. The German, nicknamed the Flying Porcupine, had become a badge of honor. It wasn't an insult, it was a warning. Everyone from experienced pilots to fresh recruits knew that attacking a 2AD Sunderland was dangerous. You might win. Probably you would win in terms of pure performance capability. But the Sunderland wouldn't die easily. And there was a reasonable chance you wouldn't make it home. The aircraft was retired after the war. Sunderlands continued to fly in various air forces into the 1950s. But by then, they were history. The jet age had arrived. Speed mattered more than toughness. The lesson of the Sunderland, that a slow, heavily armed aircraft can defend itself through firepower and stubbornness, was displaced by the notion that in modern combat, speed meant survival. In some ways, they were right. But the Sunderland had proven something else, that courage, well-placed firepower, and the willingness to fight can overcome disadvantage. So here's the question that haunts me. If the Sunderland pilots had been flying modern fighters, matching the Germans' aircraft for aircraft, would they have won more decisively? Or was the victory on that June day in 1943 possible only because the Sunderland was slow, big, and unconventional? Because it forced the pilots to be creative instead of relying on speed? Because it required them to trust their guns and their courage instead of their engines? I think the Sunderland pilots might have won more battles if they'd had better aircraft, but I think the Sunderland, for all its limitations, was exactly the aircraft that British maritime patrol needed. It couldn't win through speed, so it won through determination. Next time we're looking at the aircraft, the Luftwaffe actually threw at the Sunderland the German fighters designed to hunt patrol aircraft. Aircraft like the FW-200 Condor, the Atlantic hunter that prowled the same skies looking for convoys. Until Sunderlands. Learn to hunt it back. Subscribe so it lands in your feed. Thanks for watching.